Have you ever stood at the edge of a cliff feeling that primal mix of awe and unease? Now imagine something truly terrifying, the ground beneath your feet slowly, inexorably beginning to slide away. For the residents of San Pedro in the late 1920s, this wasn't some distant nightmare. This was reality. Just south of Los Angeles, along the palm-lined bluffs of Point Fermin, stood what seemed to be paradise incarnate. Picture a perfect coastal neighborhood where families raised their children, where gleaming red trolley cars glided past neat bungalows, and where Catalina Island sparkled like a jewel on the horizon. It looked safe, it looked permanent. But beneath those peaceful streets, the soil held a deadly secret. Here's a chilling detail that brings this disaster into focus. When the collapse began in 1929, the ground was moving as much as 11 inches every single day. Imagine waking up to find your porch tilting, watching helplessly as streets split apart, and seeing solid steel trolley tracks twisting like ribbons in the wind. How could this happen? How could a dream neighborhood, one with modern infrastructure and million-dollar views, simply crumble into the Pacific? And what haunting ruins still whisper their warnings from behind chain-link fences today? Join me on this journey as we uncover not just how Los Angeles lost an entire neighborhood to the sea, but why this story continues to captivate us nearly a century later. Before we dive deeper, I want to share something personal. I'm working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers as a small creator. If you appreciate stories like this one, please consider subscribing. Your support means everything to this channel. The 1920s were a time of unprecedented growth in Los Angeles. Cars crowded the expanding streets, new suburbs bloomed across the landscape, and the promise of the California coast drew thousands of dreamers westward. For many of these newcomers, the majestic bluffs of Point Fermin seemed like the answer to their prayers, a slice of paradise perched above the Pacific. Picture yourself waking up each morning to the endless blue of the Pacific stretching beyond your front porch, Catalina Island floating like a dream on the horizon, and palm trees swaying along streets that seemed to merge with the sea. This wasn't some exclusive resort, it was home. Developers had carefully carved neat blocks along the cliffs, dotting them with charming bungalows that promised the perfect balance. Close enough to the city for convenience, far enough for serenity. This wasn't just another California real estate venture. It was marketed as something permanent, something solid. Families weren't just buying houses. They were investing in stability, in a future where children could grow up hearing ocean waves, where neighbors would share evening conversations on their porches, and where life would flow as steadily as the Pacific tides. But as history would soon reveal, this dream of permanence was built on shifting sands. By the early 1920s, San Pedro had transformed from a quiet coastal outpost into the bustling heart of Los Angeles' maritime ambitions. The harbor hummed with activity. Ships coming and going, shipyards clanging with industry, naval vessels cutting through the waves. Working families found their opportunity here, drawn by steady jobs and the promise of a community that perfectly balanced industrial progress with coastal tranquility. At the center of this vision stood George H. Peake, a developer who saw unlimited potential in Point Fermin's dramatic cliffs. With remarkable attention to detail, he crafted a neighborhood that seemed to have everything. Modest but beautiful lots, carefully designed bungalows with manicured yards, and all the modern conveniences of city living. And the crown jewel of it all? The Pacific Electric red cars. Those iconic electric trolleys that had become symbols of Los Angeles progress ran right through the heart of the neighborhood. For residents, this meant more than just transportation. It was their direct link to the vibrant life of downtown Los Angeles, reliable and affordable, woven into the fabric of their daily lives. The people who called Point Fermin home weren't the wealthy elite of Los Angeles. They were the backbone of the city, dock workers with calloused hands, dedicated teachers, proud Navy men, and civil servants. These were ordinary Angelinos who'd found their slice of paradise. Children's laughter echoed down the streets, neighbors exchanged warm greetings from sun-dappled porches, and families planted roots deep into the soil, believing they'd found their forever home. Everything about Point Fermin spoke of stability: freshly paved streets, modern plumbing, sturdy power lines, and reliable electric transport. But permanence was merely an illusion. Beneath those tidy homes and gentle ocean breezes, the ground itself harbored a devastating secret. The first signs were subtle, easy to dismiss. Winter 1928 brought a small crack in a front yard along Paseo del Mar. City inspectors barely glanced at it, waving it off as simple drainage issues. Then came the warnings: a ruptured gas main, a burst water line beneath a local hotel. Each incident was brushed aside as routine maintenance, just the growing pains of a thriving community. If only they had known. But deep beneath their feet, a silent disaster was unfolding. The soil at Point Fermin held a fatal flaw. Water was infiltrating the ground, gradually weakening the clay and sandstone foundations. And with terrifying patience, the cliffside began its inevitable march toward the sea. Life continued its peaceful rhythm. Families tended their gardens, trolleys rattled cheerfully along their tracks, children played on sidewalks that were, unknown to all, living on borrowed time. The city's reassurances wrapped the community in a false sense of security. They trusted in what they could see: the gas lines, the sidewalks, the reliable trolley service. These modern conveniences seemed to promise everything was fine. But the warnings became impossible to ignore. Pavement split in bizarre patterns, lawns began to sink, the trolley tracks, once arrow straight, twisted like ribbons in the wind. Houses started to tilt, ever so slightly at first. By spring 1929, the truth could no longer be denied. This wasn't just poor drainage. The very earth beneath their feet was in motion. Their dream community was transforming before their eyes into a slow-motion nightmare. Yet even then, most residents couldn't fathom the scale of the disaster that was about to unfold. By spring 1929, reality could no longer be denied. Streets rippled like waves in concrete. Yards slid downhill as if pulled by an invisible hand. In a single afternoon, homes could shift several feet, while families watched helplessly as their porches tilted and walls creaked in protest. The city took emergency measures, shutting off gas lines, erecting barricades along the worst affected streets. Residents received the warning they might need to evacuate, but in truth, it was already far too late. From May to December 1929, an almost unbelievable scene unfolded. 6 acres of land simply broke away from San Pedro. Unlike an earthquake's sudden violence, this was something far more unsettling, a slow, inexorable movement. The earth itself crept downhill, advancing up to 40 feet. Entire blocks of homes were drawn toward the waiting Pacific. Newspapers called it spectacular, a slow-motion disaster. But for the families living this nightmare, it was anything but a spectacle. Imagine watching helplessly as your home tilted a little more each week, unable to sell, unable to stay, knowing that day by day, everything you'd built was slipping away. Dozens of families were forced to evacuate. Some houses were saved, carefully lifted and transported to stable ground, but others met a more tragic fate. At least 2 homes, abandoned in the slide zone, faced their final moments alone. Witnesses described the earth splitting like a curtain before these houses, once filled with life and memories, tilted, teetered, and finally plunged into the waiting waves below. The Pacific showed no mercy. Day after day, waves hammered the wreckage, splintering wood, scattering memories across the surf. For the families who once called this place home, there was nothing left to return to. Only the endless sea remained, claiming the space where their lives had once been firmly planted. The collapse of Sunken City wasn't merely about lost houses and broken streets. It was about watching an entire community unravel as families stood helpless, witnessing their world crumble piece by piece before their eyes. And even as this slow-motion tragedy played out, officials and experts grappled with a haunting question: how could this have happened? As the dust settled, scientists raced to understand Point Fermin's fatal flaw. The answer wasn't visible to the naked eye. It lay hidden in the earth itself. The bluffs, they discovered, were composed of bentonite clay, a treacherous substance that swells with water and becomes dangerously unstable. When combined with poor drainage, heavy winter rains, and the natural slope toward the ocean, the truth became clear. These cliffs were destined to fail from the very beginning. The numbers were staggering. At its peak, the ground was moving 11 inches every single day, almost a foot of earth shifting in just 24 hours. To label this as mere erosion, as city engineers initially did, was more than misleading. This was a full-scale landslide, a textbook case of geological collapse playing out in terrifying slow motion. But in those early days, the truth was almost too painful to accept. while newspapers used words like strange and spectacular, as if they were describing some curious spectacle rather than people's shattered lives. Local officials clung to false hope, desperately wanting to believe it would all somehow stabilize. And the residents? They found themselves trapped between paralyzing fear and desperate denial, holding on to any shred of hope that their homes might still be saved. But the cold hard science was undeniable. No amount of patches, no quantity of repairs, nothing could halt the Earth's inexorable movement. What had appeared to be a slice of paradise was, from its very foundation, built upon betrayal. By the early 1930s, the dream of Point Fermin had transformed into something nightmarish and unrecognizable. What was once a vibrant community had become nothing more than a jagged scar carved into the cliffside. Streets that once rang with the cheerful sound of trolley bells and children's laughter were now silent, broken slabs of concrete torn apart by the Earth's relentless motion. The city at first refused to surrender. Work crews labored tirelessly, filling cracks, patching sidewalks, desperately trying to save sunken streets. But the Earth showed no mercy. Every repair proved futile, every fix temporary. Finally, officials had to face the inevitable. Their battle against nature was lost. All they could do was erect fences around what had become a danger zone. From that point forward, Sunken City was surrendered to the whims of nature. Without its families, without care, without hope of restoration, it became nothing more than a silent monument to human ambition, perched precariously on the edge of the vast Pacific. But the silence was not destined to last. By the 1960s, whispers of the neighborhood that slid into the sea began drawing curious souls to these ruins. Adventure seekers scaled fences to explore this eerie landscape of tilted sidewalks, broken pipes, and ghostly foundations. What had once been a family tragedy had transformed into something else entirely, a mysterious attraction that called to the curious and the daring. And as the years rolled by, that quiet curiosity would evolve into something far more chaotic and uncontrolled. The transformation was dramatic. By the 1980s, these ruins, the cracked concrete and broken foundations that told such a poignant story, had become something entirely different. No longer a place for historical reflection, Sunken City had transformed into a magnetic draw for partiers, vandals, and those seeking the thrill of the forbidden. As darkness fell on weekend nights, the once silent cliffs now echoed with pounding music, explosive fireworks, and the jarring crash of shattering bottles. Graffiti artists claimed the concrete remnants as their canvas, layering the old walls with bold spray paint. Bonfires cast dancing shadows across the ruins, while crowds of teenagers transformed this site of tragedy into their personal playground. For those living nearby, this new chapter of Sunken City's story brought nothing but misery. The Los Angeles Times documented a litany of complaints: trespassing, violent confrontations, rampant drug use, and countless sleepless nights for the surrounding community. One local woman's testimony painted a vivid picture of the disruption. "I haven't had a peaceful night's rest in months," she admitted, her voice heavy with exhaustion. The community demanded action, flooding city council meetings with urgent calls for increased police patrols, floodlights, even barbed wire fences. The city found itself in an impossible position. While residents desperately needed protection, officials hesitated to completely wall off what was technically public land. Their compromise? A sturdier fence, but deliberately without barbed wire. It was a half measure that satisfied no one. Despite their best efforts to contain the chaos, the fences developed gaps, and the crowds kept coming. Sunken City's reputation as an outlaw hangout only grew stronger. To some thrill seekers, it was an irresistible playground for rebellion. To others, it represented something darker, a place where tragedy had been buried beneath waves of noise and neglect. What was once a peaceful neighborhood had transformed into something entirely different, reshaping Sunken City's story for a new generation. But by the 1990s, the ruins began attracting a different kind of visitor. Artists and filmmakers discovered its haunting beauty. Student films, music videos, and photo shoots transformed the graffiti-covered slabs and twisted foundations into an iconic backdrop. Its post-apocalyptic aesthetic against the Pacific was simply irresistible. Then came the moment that changed everything. 2015's finale of Fear the Walking Dead. The ruins played themselves perfectly, a shattered, haunting remnant of civilization. The episode sparked a new wave of curiosity, with fans from across the country making pilgrimages to see the location for themselves. Soon, influential blogs like Atlas Obscura were featuring Sunken City as a hidden treasure, if you dared to explore it. But it was social media that truly transformed the ruins' reputation. Instagrammers and YouTubers began showcasing it as an urban playground, their posts reaching far beyond Los Angeles. For city officials, it was history repeating itself. Once again, crowds were bypassing fences, risking injury or worse. Even increased LAPD patrols couldn't stem the tide of visitors that each viral post brought. Sunken City had evolved into something unprecedented, a cultural icon, a hybrid of history, ruin, and spectacle. Yet beneath the layers of graffiti and viral fame, something was being lost. The real story of the families who once called this place home and the tragedy of their loss. Nearly a century after the collapse, the ruins still stand, though time has left its mark. Look closely beyond the fences, and you can still trace the skeleton of a neighborhood that once thrived on these cliffs. Broken sidewalks emerge from the dirt like archaeological finds, their curbs and gutters still visible. They form ghostly outlines of streets where children once played and neighbors gathered. Twisted lengths of rusted trolley rail pierce the earth, silent remnants of the red car line that once carried families between these bluffs and downtown Los Angeles. The foundations of homes still linger, some reduced to flat rectangles of cracked concrete, others hold on to fragments, tiles, rebar, doorsteps that once welcomed families home to ocean views. Retaining walls lean at impossible angles, their graffiti-covered surfaces still recognizable as pieces of a community built with hope. Scattered pipes and broken sewer lines peek through the soil, reminders of how permanent this neighborhood once seemed. And yet, nature is slowly reclaiming it all, with palms and brush growing through the ruins. For those who peer through the fences today, it takes imagination to see the neighborhood that once was. But pause long enough, and you'll realize these aren't just ruins. They're traces of lives lived, dreams lost, and a city that learned too late how fragile the ground beneath it truly was. Sunken City stands as both warning and memorial. A thriving community, complete with homes, families, and dreams, wasn't erased in an instant, but slowly, inexorably, bit by bit, until the ocean claimed what people once thought permanent. The story leaves us with a haunting lesson. Even the strongest foundations can fail when the ground beneath isn't as solid as it seems. So let me ask you this. If the fences came down tomorrow, would you step inside Sunken City to see its ruins up close, or would you keep your distance? If you've enjoyed uncovering this hidden history with me today, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with a friend. Every subscription helps our channel grow, and there are many more fascinating stories waiting to be told.